It is a source of great pride for us at IAC that we don't run from tough issues. We had a panel yesterday, I believe, on Haredim, and on the inclusion of Haredim and what's happening in the Haredi community in Israel. Obviously a very tough issue and one that's very divisive. This one is a lot more divisive. And it tore the country to pieces before October 7th. And we felt it was our obligation to have a discussion, not a debate, but a deep discussion about what is, no matter what side you're on, and we're not here to change anyone's mind, but what is a deep, legitimate issue. And I can tell you as a lawyer who has dealt with constitutional law issues, this is a real debate. And when it comes to real debate, we've talked all about unity during this conference and coming together and putting aside differences. You can't do that by shouting epithets. This person wants to bring down the government, and that person wants to take away democracy. That doesn't do justice to what is really a deep constitutional debate. And so I wanted to open with that to say, look, whatever, you might be very passionate about this issue. This is not the time to make this a public forum for debate. This is the opportunity to hear from two scholars, real scholars, on this issue, one in favor of judicial reform, one against, and to understand the depth of the issue and that both sides really have arguments. And so I wanted to open with that, okay? Again, this is not about changing anyone's mind here, it's about elevating the debate, because we, as Jews who care about Jewish unity, have an obligation to elevate the debate and to bring respect, mutual respect, to an issue that sadly has been treated with a great deal of disrespect by both sides toward the other. So with that said, that's my opening preface to this, what should be an incredibly interesting panel. And with that, I'll hand it over to my good friend, our moderator, Yigal. Take it away.
Toda rabba. Thank you very much, Elan, for your opening remarks. And you pretty much said everything that we were going to say in the beginning as a kind of description of what this is all about. And by the way, I think this is a great conference, a great kinus, IAC. I'm here the first time, and it's really, really enriching, empowering, and inspiring, the whole thing. And thank you for coming. This is not going to be entertainment. This is going to be serious stuff, because this is the stuff that's been rocking and shaking the foundations, the sole foundations of the State of Israel in the last few years. Actually, it kind of stopped on October 7th, but it's going to come up again. We're in the beginning of an election year. There is an investigation committee, one that shape or another, coming up, and we're getting back to business. Everybody's saying we don't want to go back to October 6th, but we're heading right there. So, having said that, just a quick question. Who knows what the override clause is? Override clause. הנה עורכי דין כאן. So there are some lawyers here. Those who knew what override clause is are all lawyers? Are you a lawyer? Yes, you are. Are you? Yes, you are. Are you? You're not. Okay, you're married to a lawyer. פסקת ההתגברות בעברית. It is a real honor and pleasure having by my side Yonatan Green and Yohanan Plesner. Why don't you guys go ahead and present yourselves, and we'll go with opening remarks. Yohanan, let's start with you. You have your own mic. So, yeah.
So hi, good afternoon. Yohanan Plesner. I'm president of the Israel Democracy Institute. It's a think tank dedicated to strengthening the foundations of Israeli democracy, but actually way beyond. We're actually dealing with a whole array of domestic internal challenges, reform in the government, in the Knesset, political reform, economic reform, integration of Arab society, Haredi society. Elan, who kindly introduced this panel, is he here? I can't see him. You spoke, you said there were two major thorny issues. So yesterday there was a panel on the exemption bill and integration of Haredim, and today this panel. So I had the honor of participating in both, controversial or difficult issues. And in many ways, I used to say that, and I think it's still true, even after October 7th and the devastating attack and massacre and what we've been going through and might still go through. You know, some people canceled their flights to Israel because they think, Iran is going to attack us. So by no means is the existential threat, did it vanish. It exists, but I think that if we are together and united, and if we get our act together and build our institutions properly and think ahead, we can actually deal with those external challenges, as we also proved even after the terrible catastrophe of October 7th. And in many ways, the way in which we will deal with our internal challenges and divisions will determine whether Israel will continue to be a Jewish and democratic and prosperous and strong state. And this in many ways is, I think, the importance of this discussion.
Yeah. Let's stop here and give Yonatan and Yohanan. Okay, try not to mix
Let's
it
hope
up.
it doesn't get too confusing.
Introduce yourself. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. I'm Yonatan Green. Some people call me Johnny. I am born and raised in Israel, even though it doesn't necessarily quite sound like that. I'm currently today a fellow at the Georgetown University Law Center, or what's called the Center for the Constitution. I'm an Israeli-American lawyer. In Israel in 2019, I founded what's called the Israel Law and Liberty Forum, together with the Tikva Fund, and that's an organization that advances conservative legal thought, rule of law, judicial restraint. In Israel, we have student chapters at Israel's top law schools and many other things. And finally, last but not least, I recently wrote a book called Rogue Justice, The Rise of Judicial Supremacy in Israel. You can get it on Amazon. We have a few copies even back there. It's a shameless plug. It's a large book, and that will tie directly into my opening statement, but I think that works for an introduction.
Toda rabba. Yohanan, what do you think are the basic elements, the things that we should take under consideration when we come to talk about judicial reform, or, as it's also known, as the political...
The coup.
The coup.
Well, it's actually, by the way, just by way of introduction, I grew up in Jerusalem. Yigal, I actually worked as a youngster in the same place where Yigal worked in Rashut HaShidur in the...
We kind of know each other for 50 years because...
In the youth department of before there was any television.
So, איך אומרים גילוי נאות באנגלית?
Full disclosure.
His mother was my boss for a short period.
In the 70s.
Hey, nobody told me this before
And
the panel.
then a formative part of my life is a major in reserves in Sayeret Matkal. I still serve in reserves, and in many ways it also shapes the way I look at Israeli society. I remember, perhaps Yigal, one quick comment on that. When I was for 6 years a member of Knesset, and in the Knesset, one of the characteristics then, and I imagine that it's probably even worse today, was that you literally can get two people working together seriously, genuinely, with integrity, and perseverance over one issue to promote the common good. There's always intrigues, also within the same parties and so on, and personal interest and so on. And then, as I was in the Knesset, again for 6 years, I was also continuing to serve in Miluim. And one of my jobs in Miluim is doing the selection process for Sayeret Matkal, for the Special Forces units. We get thousands of kids, we torture them for 5 days, and we select the few dozens that fit into Sayeret Matkal, Shaldag, the Commando Brigade, and so on. And I remember being so puzzled. Today I take it for granted, because for many years I'm not in politics, but being puzzled by the idea that perhaps we were about 60 commanders, instructors running this show, that 60 people can collaborate together on a mission. Then we sit openly, each discusses his own failures in a debriefing in order to constantly improve the process. And I said, wow, that's such a bliss, so much oxygen. And in many ways, I think it's illustrative, this story, because Israeli society, and as we've seen it, since October 7th, and I think we have to adjust this discussion, not to make it a October 6th discussion and to repeat a conversation that we could have had in October 6th, but rather to try and see how we should manage our conflicts in a post-October 7th era, where and to prioritize unity and to see how we can deal with our difficult problems. And one of the things we learned is that Israeli society has beautiful strength and centers of strength and ingenuity, and our youngsters are phenomenal, and we have institutions of excellence both in the private sector and in the defense establishment and in other parts of society. And the common denominator, both of the ideas that were behind the judicial reform / overhaul, but also now in many of the new incarnation of that thinking, is basically concentrating all governing power in the hands of the political majority. So we're taking the institution that has today the least trust of the Israeli people. About 7 or 8% of Israelis, when we ask them, do you trust political parties? Only 7 or 8% of Israelis trust the parties. I think it's pretty equivalent to what happens here in Congress as well. And the common denominator is we're saying, okay, politicians work in a way that doesn't necessarily promote meritocracy, collaboration, unity, doesn't help us deal with the essence, with the serious problems of Israeli society, and we want to concentrate all governing power there with no checks and balances. And today, Yigal, perhaps I'll end this comment, because I know we want a ping pong and many short comments so it won't be boring. What bothers me now is not so much those judicial steps and exactly finding the right balance between the court and the executive branch, because in many ways the way the political system conducts itself in these days, it renders it meaningless what's written in the law. And I hate to break the news, because I know we're coming all together here from throughout the United States, Israelis and Jews who love Israel and want to strengthen Israel, and we generally want to hear good news about what's happening. But what's happening now, both in the Knesset, in terms of the level of the debate, the ferocious attack on professionals in the name of who are you? Why do you think you can express your views? The fact that the government explicitly violates orders of or instructions of legal advisors that define what is within the confines of its authority. And now, for the first time, even a government that is explicitly violating court orders. There was a court order last week. It's technical, I won't get into it, that has to do with the recruitment of the ultra-Orthodox. The government explicitly violates it. So in many ways, the discussion that we had in October 6th has transformed into something new. It's almost managing by chaos, disregarding the authorities of professionals within government, of the one check to the otherwise all-encompassing power of a government, which is the Supreme Court. And what one would expect after 2 years of war, after such terrible challenges and what we've gone through and so many casualties, and of course a government that at least has some responsibility over those failures, you would expect some humility in the way it would advance policy, and not to go and advance the most divisive issues in the most divisive manner. And this is very disconcerting.
This is a very, thank you. It's a pretty accurate description of the situation, the way it's been foreseen for a long period of time. But it is my personal feeling as a reporter. I'm a US correspondent for I-24 News. I've been serving for the public Israeli broadcast, Kan and Rashut HaShidur, for many years. And my feeling is that not too many people, no matter which side you're with, either before or after October 6 or 7, not too many people, Yonatan, do understand what this is all about. Everybody has a position. Everybody has a stand about it, but not too many people understand what this is all about.
Thank you, Yigal, and thank you also, Yohanan. I think that leads wonderfully into what I want to say, and I won't respond directly to what Yohanan said, even though I'm sure we will a little bit later, but I'm sure the things that I say will indirectly cover some of the points. If we can start with a show of hands, and I think Yigal helped me out with that earlier, how many people here think Israel has a constitution? How many of you think Israel has a constitution? Don't be shy. I saw my hand. Don't be shy. How many people here? I saw you. I saw you. Pick up your hand. Okay. How many people here think Israel does not have a constitution? Okay, that's a lot of hands. Okay, that's very interesting because the Supreme Court of Israel is pretty sure Israel has a constitution and pretty sure it strikes down laws according to that constitution. So we'll come back to that in a moment. I want to make some quick preliminary remarks. One is that people, us included, Jews in the U.S., Israeli Americans, Israelis even in Israel, need to keep an open mind on this. And I want you, for this conversation at least, to set aside some of our preconceived notions of what this is about. One of the amazing things about this issue, judicial reform in Israel, the Israeli judiciary, is the gap between how important this is, how central it is to Israel's survival and flourishing, and the lack of knowledge on the other side. You know, there have been a lot of panels here about anti-Semitism and, campus demonstrations, that kind of thing. And sometimes you'll see on TV, someone will say, Palestine was a country 200 years ago. And you're thinking to yourself, this guy doesn't know anything. Like, they're completely clueless. Well, I'm sorry to tell you that is the case for most of us, most Israelis, most Americans, when it comes to the legal system in Israel. And I think the details matter here enormously. And the first thing that we need to do, both in Israel and abroad, is to educate ourselves. And here I'm going to give another shameless plug to the book. If only there was a book in English that explains in detail some of these issues. Well, now there is one. The last thing I want to say, just as a preliminary note, is that what I want you to put in your mind is that, as a matter of fact, this is not an issue of left and right. The critics of the court, some of the most severe and acute critics of the Supreme Court and what it's done, have come from the political left, from the political center. They've come from academia, they've come from politics, they've come from law. It includes judges and law professors, and of course also politicians. It's not a new problem. I think Yigal was saying, this crisis has been following us for the last few years. Actually, it's been following us for the last few decades. This is nothing new, and this crisis has been a long time coming. And we're just seeing the culmination of a lot of those currents. And finally, this is a grassroots movement. The desire for judicial reform and to roll back a lot of the Supreme Court's power represents a massive part of the Israeli electorate. So don't buy any idea that this is some caprice of just a handful of politicians who want to maintain power. This represents a huge swath of the Israeli electorate. Now, in the few minutes that I have left, I want to briefly describe the problem in very overarching terms. Why don't we name all the countries in which a court can strike down laws, primary legislation by the elected parliament without a constitution? Israel. It's the only one. Name all the countries in which a court can tell the prime minister who to hire and who not to hire, and who to fire and who not to fire from their cabinet ministers or from the most senior positions in government without any statutory basis in law. Nothing. Yuk, just on ether and magic. There's only one answer, of course, only one country. That's Israel. Tell me all the countries, and I think Yohanan mentioned, the government was flouting and ignoring the instructions of the legal advisors, of the legal counsel of the government. Name all the countries in which a legal counsel of the government, unelected bureaucrat, can dictate policy to the government through binding legal counsel or through a monopoly over the government's representation in court. That's right, there's only one. It's only Israel. Now, none of this, everything that I've described, none of that is a result of statutory law. None of that is a result of Israeli deliberate electoral decision-making, of compromise, of the kind of rules that we're used to that might set up that kind of rules. No, all of that is the result of consistent, methodical, unilateral action by the Israeli Supreme Court. Now, what's important for us here, and like I said, we're in this constitutional crisis since the 1980s, is that the judiciary, and especially the Supreme Court, has essentially abandoned the law, abandoned the rule of law, and abandoned democracy over the past 40 years. Now, obviously, we won't go into every single one of those elements, and again, there's a very wonderful book here that can give you all that information, but just to touch upon some of these issues. Since the early 1980s, the court developed a doctrine that says the law's words don't matter. A judge can implement the objective purpose of the law, which means what a judge thinks the purpose should be of the law, even if that purpose is the exact opposite of what the legislators that enacted it wanted it to be, even if it contradicts the words of the law. the court decided that the court can also rule on non-legal matters, on matters of pure policy. That's called the justiciability resolution. Famously, Haron Barak, the legendary Chief Justice, says Hakol Shafit, everything is justiciable, where the court said that even matters of pure policy decision-making with no basis in law are under the authority of the court to essentially function as a second government. And of course, and this, again, these are just tidbits, these are just small parts of this, the court decided in 1995, based on two random laws that were enacted in 1992 by a tiny majority of Knesset members, less than even half of the Knesset members were present at the time of voting on these laws. The court decided it could strike down primary legislation. No other country in the world where it works like this, strike down primary legislation without the benefit of a written constitution. Now, I think I have 2 more minutes. I'm kind of trying to keep track of time.
Go ahead, we're going
2 more minutes. Why is this so bad? Well, I think we can go a very long time, and this is, part of our issue when I talk about educating ourselves. We could have a whole convention just like this at the IAC, but only talking about legal issues. So I don't want you to think that coming out of this panel, you now have a real stronger, better idea of this. You don't. That's the truth. This is an extremely complicated and sophisticated issue. There's massive ground to cover and massive history. I know I wrote a book. This could have been 5 volumes. This is the short version. But why is it so bad? I want you to put aside for a second, and I think there are lots of Americans here, so you know why this is important, but I want to put aside, the trivial things like democracy, the rule of law, separation of powers. Let's ignore all these trivialities. One is that, which of course many of these things the court has done is in direct contradiction to all these principles. One of them is that the court has enacted genuinely bad policies, which the court is single-handedly responsible for. If we're talking about Israeli immigration policy, where the court has struck down 5 different statutes affecting immigration policy in Israel, including immigration from continental Africa. I don't know if you know this, but there's only one developed country in the world with a land border with continental Africa. That's Israel, and you can think about the ramifications of that. Prison crowding is insane in Israel, among other things, because the court struck down a law which was going to set up private prisons. Now, you might not like private prisons, you could be against it, but many democracies across the world have private prisons. The court struck that down because it disproportionately harmed the dignity of inmates, and so on and so forth. I will only just give one last example of course, national security and defense issues. The court, the Israeli Supreme Court, intervenes in national security and defense and military issues in a scope and to a degree which is unparalleled in the world. And of course, we can think of so many recent examples. Of course, in 2018, the court directly affected the way that the military acts on the border with Gaza, ultimately affecting the way that the Israeli military could protect the perimeter. I don't know if you're familiar, but the Israeli government was treating relatives of Hamas members, senior Hamas members, for cancer. They were getting medical treatment in Israel. When the Israeli government wanted to stop that as leverage to release Gilad Shalit from captivity, the Supreme Court blocked it and said, no, it's unreasonable. You have to treat Hamas relatives for their medical issues. I'm going to stop there. There are many, many other issues
we're going to go
cover.
back to this. We're going to go back to
We're going to come back.
Toda rabba. Yonatan. Israel, of course, has no constitution. There are all those special rules, all this special legislation that we all know about since the Ben-Gurion years. And also, some Knesset legislation can still be considered as unconstitutional. And here I'm asking you, Yohanan Plesner, you've been a Knesset member. I think you've been Yoshev-Rosh Siat Kadima for a long time, נכון?
Deputy, but de facto I managed it. Yeah.
So here's my question to you. How come in a democracy that the chosen body of the people can make a legislation and the Supreme Court can cancel this legislation? Just anything, just about anything. And how come the judicial advisor to the government, that's the quick translation of what her position is.
You mean the Attorney General?
It's Attorney General
and the legal advisor to the government.
Mishpatim in the United States.
Correct.
This is not her position. Her position is stated as the judicial advisor to the government.
Right.
How can she decide what is right and what is wrong, what is legal and what is not legal, and how can she cancel nominations and legislations and just everything?
Okay, thanks for the question. Now, I don't want to sort of respond with it. Basically, everything we're talking about can be, as you mentioned, a long debate, and I'd like to try and simplify it, make it relevant to our challenges today. So, yes, Israel was established without a constitution. There was, in the Declaration of Independence, we got a year. The Knesset was convened as both a parliament, initially elected, and a sefa mechonenet, a constitutional assembly, and was supposed to come up with a constitution. It decided, rather than coming up with a constitution, for all sorts of reasons, to develop our constitution gradually by legislating basic laws. And therefore, when the question was asked, do we have a constitution or not? We have you call it a constitutional tradition that we don't have a fully fledged constitution, but we have a constitution tradition that has been evolving over decades. Now, does Israel need judicial reform? Of course it does. There's no question about it. And some of I'm in an institute that part of our role and goal is to constantly come up with ideas of how to improve and how to change. So the idea, for example, you asked me about, or you alluded to it, about redefining the role of the יועצת המשפטית לממשלה, the legal advisor to the government, that is basically a combination of two roles, state prosecutor and the head of the legal apparatus of the government. Is it etched in stone that those two roles need to come together? No. As a matter of fact, a policy paper that was developed at IDI, the institute that I'm in, I proposed an idea on how to separate those two roles and how to nominate those two people. One, the state prosecutor, much farther away from politics, because there's no reason that he will be close to the political system, and how to define the roles and responsibilities of the Attorney General in a legal manner. So, of course, one can discuss it and one can articulate it. And by the way, I tried to, I was in discussion to promote legislation in that regard with Yariv Levin. We were then he's today Justice Minister, and basically promoting the legal overhaul / reform, depending on your vantage point, how you want to label it. So it's not so much the question of whether we need to reform, of course, because we are in an unfinished constitutional project. And the current state of affairs reflects a unique balance that has evolved in Israel in a democracy that does not have a constitution. So unlike in the US, where you have a very rigid constitution, and the Supreme Court, and a House, and a Senate, and a president that has veto, and they have mutual vetoes on one another, and states that have power. So there's an entire array of institutional structure, and of course a Bill of Rights that ensures both rights and devolves power, and various arrangements of checks and balances. All of this does not exist in our democracy. In our democracy, we do not have a Bill of Rights. We do not have local governments with any kind of a constitutional status. The Knesset is completely controlled by the government, and is essentially, if somebody seriously, and as serving in the Knesset, and I know it very intimately and very well, if somebody seriously wants to strengthen the checks and balances, the first thing is, first of all, to strengthen the Knesset. And there's a whole set of recommendations and so on how to do it. And so in our unique system, where we don't have any of those checks and balances that exist, whether in the US or in other developed parliamentary democracies, that ensure two basic things. Number one, that the government can govern, and number two, that there would be some constraints to its otherwise all-powerful capabilities. What's the difference between a government in a democratic state and a government in an authoritarian state? A government in an authoritarian state has no boundaries to its power. Nobody tells them, okay, you can only do this, but beyond that, it's beyond the law, beyond the Constitution, you need to persuade others and so on. This is the difference. There's no notion of democracy where a majority or half of the population plus one elect someone, and then they have an all-encompassing power to make all decisions. So the unique way our system involved, there was one main check to the otherwise all-powerful coalition majority, which evolved as the Supreme Court, and of course within the government, the legal apparatus. As I mentioned before, we can talk and I'm sure we can agree, and actually I was part of conversations to try and find compromises during the whole debate around the judicial overall, and many changes, including the Judicial Appointments Committee and so on. A lot of things can change and nothing is sacred. But, and here I think we should, again, jump from, because everything we said, you said, I said so far, is a discussion we could have had 2 years, more than 2 years and 3 months ago, just before the war started, when we saw that the way this discussion was managed was ripped Israeli society apart, was contributed to leading our enemies to think that it's a good time to attack us and try to annihilate us, and therefore there is no logic whatsoever to return to that way of managing a debate. I took on myself, it's easy to tell off others. I took on myself to constantly not to return to that. I'm trying also to implement it in this conversation here, to try and be both open-minded and forward-looking. Now, the point about all of these serious, legitimate debates on how to strike the right balance between the authorities, a constitutional debate. It's interesting for Yonatan and for myself because it's also our day job to some extent. This is what we're paid to do, and we do it, I guess, because we love it. It's all well and good. But my main contention, Yigal, is that this is it's not what the argument is about. As I mentioned before, I was in favor of discussing splitting up the role of the Attorney General. I was in favor of making more concrete the offense of breach of trust and mirma afarat emunim, breach of trust and fraud. But, and actually Yariv Levin and I promoted the legislation, again with the support of IDI then, on making it more concrete so it won't be too ambiguous. But it's not what we're seeing now. Now what we're seeing in the Knesset, and this I think is something that should alert all of us. And it's a new discussion. It's not the same discussion that we had 2 years ago. And the attempt is again to concentrate all power. It's not changing the balance and striking a new balance and seeing how our democracy can be run more effectively. It's concentrating all power in the hands of the political majority and changing Israeli democracy in a way that will weaken it dramatically. And I'm being I'm being very cautious in my wording. For example, when the government wants to appoint and says, okay, who are you to conduct oversight on our decisions? We want to appoint a civil service commissioner, without any proper oversight. So you can say, okay, they were elected, they can do it. But now, us, Jews, Israelis, when we want a strong state, do we really want that any politician can nominate anyone without any standards and any supervision? So we saw a case where the Civil Service Commissioner, the most important person in the civil service that sets standards and ensures meritocracy and ensures that the public goods that the government supplies will be in the highest standard so we can be continue to be a strong country, what they try to nominate is the mother of the secretary of the prime minister so she can approve, all the, how do you say it in English, all the little combinot around. So, but this is one example that illustrates something a lot broader. When you come up with a legislation that says, okay, now all the government companies, I want to fully politicize the way we man their boards, something like a Ta'asiya Avirit that does Arrow 3. Why do we now want to ensure that every minister can appoint his cousins with no scrutiny whatsoever to the most important companies that ensure that there will be also Arrow 4 and Arrow 5? Why do we want to, and the one authority that today is left in Israel that can try and somehow inject some common sense, some constraints, unfortunately, is only the Supreme Court. When we look today at the head of Shin Bet, the Shin Bet in Israel are the good guys, and the Shin Bet, and therefore there's very little legislation that constrains them in any way, because historically we gave them tons of power because they're protecting us against terrorists. But this power can also be misused. And we never took it into account because it was always the good guys. And now the head of Shin Bet that was appointed after a 5-minute interview in the car of the Prime Minister with no experience whatsoever in the Shin Bet, and now he was barred from dealing with a Qatar investigation of Mr. Netanyahu. So now he took as a number 2 somebody who left the organization 8 years ago, who never reached the top level, the equivalent of a general, which was always the tradition that this is how you move to the number 2 position. Somebody actually that in those 8 years worked in Netanyahu's office, and he's now going to be in charge of exhausting the Qatar interrogation about how the evil Qataris that are now trying to spread jihad throughout the West and throughout our region, alongside with the Turks and alongside with Hamas, don't we want to know the truth about it? So now the person that is going to be in charge, do we want some scrutiny, or we want, in the name of those novel constitutional debates that I really want to have with you, a constitutional debate, but it's not the issue now. The issue is not a constitutional debate. The issue is politicians who want to grab all power for all sorts of reasons. After a 2-year war, when our warriors and youngsters and throughout civil society performed so well, and this country deserves a political system that will conduct those serious debates. And after decades of debating, reach broad consensus around those issues. And I can tell you, as somebody who took part in many of those debates, we can reach consensus. And I've been also polling the Israeli people, and I see that there's many views of how we can strike the balance and fix many of the problems. For example, in the judicial system, that proceedings are far too long. And that's all well and good. We need to fix it. And the interrogation phase by the law enforcement institutions is also far too long. But does anyone serious think that the way to fix these things is fully politicizing the system of appointing all our judges, from traffic law judges all the way to the Supreme Court? Did the politicians, do the Israeli people have trust in do the Israeli people have trust necessarily in the appointments of politicians? No. So we can change the system, we can think about other ways, but the idea of concentrating all power in the hands of the political majority at this sensitive time can risk our most important institutions and the fabric of Israeli society, and therefore Yonatan, I think that the most important thing we have to put our hands on is not only about what are the changes that we want to make, but how does the process need to look like.
You have more time to put your input or your positions. You've made some very important remarks about the different issues that are in the core of the crisis, such as the committee for appointing judges, the overruling of legislation and everything, and the fact that some of the judicial reform has been done in a very harsh way that didn't take under consideration the minority. And here is my question to you, Yonatan. Some people in the right wing, Hashamranim, Bayamina Politi, in the state of Israel and outside, seriously believe and seriously regret about the way it's been done. I remember the night the Minister of Justice, as its equivalent to Attorney General in Israel, Yariv Levin, came on live TV that night, and there was one hit after the other. Wouldn't it have been much better if they would have done it with negotiation, quietly, before rushing to judgment, so to speak, before going to public TV, going to live TV, trying to find some compromise in the different areas that we're debating, that we're talking about. Could it have been, at least there would have been a chance to change things from the very beginning instead of burning, torches and fires in the Elan freeway.
The torches and fires in the Elan freeway was not from the side of the reform, let me remind you. But the answer is no, and I will respond to that in detail in a moment, but I will take a moment also to respond to what Yohanan said. Yes, absolutely, I think October 7th taught us all a lesson about the way that we handle this debate. So for example, calling legitimate government reforms a coup is one thing we should obviously stop. Making or pretending that this is all about democracy or the end or the beginning of Israeli democracy is also, I think, something which needs to leave the lexicon. However, I don't think that's a substitute for having the debate itself. Yes, we absolutely have to continue having this conversation, substantive and in-depth, about judicial power, about what the Supreme Court has done. And this relates to one of my first comments, which is that we need to educate ourselves, and so much of the conversation so far has been on the basis of epithets, as Elan said, or on slogans and these sort of bald assertions without anyone having an idea. Now, I wrote to myself here, I wrote this before Shabbat, and that's why sadly I don't have a pen to jot down any thoughts, so excuse me if I don't address anything. I wrote down here excuses. Because, of course, there are so many excuses for why the court has done what it's done, for its lawless accumulation of power against what, deviating from any democratic norm and what happens in every country with the rule of law. And they usually go along the lines of what Yohanan has described. The electoral system is flawed and doesn't have good representation, and we don't have counter-majoritarian mechanisms. Counter-majoritarian means limits on majority power in the parliament, like a constitution, or maybe a second house of parliament, right? Sometimes it's just the evil politicians and how terrible they are and how we can't trust them to have power. The problem is that we are pretending that this is a conversation about what the best arrangement would be for Israel. Should we have a constitution or not? What should be the powers of the legal advisor to the government, and so on? That's not really the conversation we're having, because the court has already decided that for us. The court has already imposed these lawless, frankly insane arrangements, which no other country in the world shares. And that's part of this argument that Israel is so unique. Israel is a special case in the annals of democracy. It's really not. Israel is just another democracy. Frankly, it's actually one of the most stable democracies in the world, one of only 20 democracies that have been consistently democracy since the 1950s. And my question for you is, if Machat Golani, right, the brigade commander of Golani. You know what Golani is, right? Does everyone know Golani is a regiment, an infantry regiment in Israel? If Machat Golani stormed the Knesset, held everyone at gunpoint, and said, I'm going to fix the Israeli electoral system, and I'm going to make rules which are only good for human rights and for limiting corrupt government, etc., would that be okay? Is that liberal democracy? And if your answer is no, then why a general no but a judge yes? Why is a judge allowed to answer all those questions for society, to impose its so-called solutions on society on all these problems without any basis in law, without any basis in what the electorate wants, without any kind of political process? Now, the point here which I want to make, which is very important, I think, in this context, is that yes, absolutely, the Israeli electoral and democratic political system suffers from some profound problems that we've had with us since the founding of the state. Now, I think they're exaggerated sometimes. It's not that they're so different from other problems that other democracies have. They are sometimes exaggerated for the purpose of inventing all these solutions. But I'll say something else. Do you think the court has made any progress in fixing these problems? Because the resounding answer is no. Under no theory of democratic government, under no theory of liberal democracy, and under no practice in any country in the world, is it the court's job to fix these problems or even to mitigate them. Because what happens is that the court makes it worse. It makes it worse. It's an anesthetic instead of a treatment. It gives the patient morphine to keep it going instead of giving it the treatment that it needs. Yes, we want to fix the electoral system. Good. The IDI, which I know it does and has in the past, should have projects, right? The Israel Democracy Institute should have projects on fixing the Israeli electoral system. You need to persuade. I know you do. You need to persuade the public that this is something that's necessary. You need to have a public debate, an actual conversation. And what the court constantly does is it kills the patient with endless morphine and anesthetic. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Okay, I think Yonatan made some very important point. Here's my question to you, because we want to open up the
Oh, wait, I
floor.
owe you an answer for how the reform was conducted. I want to give that 20 seconds. It won't be a long answer.
Right.
Is that okay? Because I do. What's
Go
that?
for it.
Take my time. Okay. No, I'm still
It's
within my
20
time.
seconds. We're not going to appeal to the
No,
Supreme
it'll be
Court,
a
right?
short one. It'll be a short one.
Don't worry about it.
I think the real answer is the reform could have been conducted differently, not in the way that you mean. They could have had better PR, and they did it in a clumsy and mealy-mouthed and heavy-handed way in terms of the way that it was marketed to the public. This was always going to be ugly. There is no version of judicial, remember what I'm saying to you right now, there is no version of judicial reform which goes down smoothly. And the reason is because what the Supreme Court has done over the past 40 years is it has created winners and losers. There are clear beneficiaries of the court's power in Israel today, and those beneficiaries have everything to lose and nothing to gain by letting this pass by any measure. Objectively, and I know we won't have a long conversation about this now, objectively, the judicial reforms that were proposed in 2023, they were benign. And we can do an autopsy and we can do a post-mortem because they're dead, and I don't know if we need to kick that dead horse, but they were benign by any objective measure. Canceling the 1992 laws, that would have been an extreme reform. Canceling the LCG office and completely overhauling and making a brand new office with totally different powers, that would have been a serious reform. But minimizing judicial review a little bit, saying that legal counsel to the government's legal opinion is not binding, these are all on the fringes. Now, we can have a whole conversation again about reform, but the point is, A, yes, we need to have this conversation, we need to educate ourselves seriously about it, but B, until you understand the magnitude of the problem, you cannot understand whether the solution is appropriate for it. And in that sense, I'm saying that there's no version of judicial reform which would have gone down smoothly without a very serious fight from the other side, who are the beneficiaries of judicial supremacy in Israel.
So no matter what happens, it's going to get worse before it gets better, right?
It is absolutely going to get worse before it gets better.
Here's the thing. Let me tell you guys, between the two of you, just a second, the thing that's surprising me the most is the audience. Look how everybody's behaving beautifully.
This is for the audience.
Look at everybody.
It's the Shabbat spirit.
This is not...
It's the Shabbat spirit.
Yeah, you should have been last night at the... Ben, you've been there with me. At the media conference, at Meet the Press session, Elan, this was outrageous. Everybody was shouting at everybody.
But it's a manifestation, or it's an example
hour
of...
and a half. So, 12 points to the audience, to the beautiful audience that keep... we want to open up. Since it's been going on like this, just a moment. Since it's been going on like this so smoothly, we're going to open up for some questions, providing you keep behaving nice. But let me ask you.
There are only 35 hands
I
in
need
the
to
audience
ask you
for
both
questions.
one more question and let you finish your statements. Could you at all agree with anything that he's just mentioned?
I started with agreeing that there's a need for judicial reform. There's a need for reforming our courts regardless of their constitutional role and defining the constitutional, institutional makeup of the Israeli state, of course. So I absolutely agree with it, but it's like a car or any system. You have to look at it in a holistic manner. For example, I'm not only for weakening the government. I also thought, and got some criticism for that alongside with strengthening the checks and balances and the supervision of over the government, at the same time, you should also strengthen the stability or make it more difficult to dissolve the Knesset and give the government a longer horizon. So within the confines of its responsibility, I think that the government needs to have more responsibility and more ability and stronger incentives to plan for the long term. So the whole idea is to look at it in a holistic manner. Now, with your permission, I think there's a couple of very important points. Number one, in continuation of our discussion, and by the way, you compared it to last night, I think it's also a reflection of where our media today that manages or mediates our discussion. Today, the role of our media is not to have genuine discussion of the
שוב
issues.
התקשורת אשמה.
But to maximize the media and digital media, but to maximize emotions and emotional feedback.
Get the journalists, get it.
No, I take the fifth. I take the fifth. You know, everybody is accusing
all
the
your
media.
fault,
You know, I
but-
say just one sentence, with just one word. You know, Yitzhak Rabin used to say, the good late Yitzhak Rabin, if everybody is accusing the media, both sides, maybe the media is doing a good job.
But I accuse actually the digital media and the big tech and their interest in that, but that's a different issue. I think that, you know, Yonatan, I think you did a good job in portraying the sort of one of the main, I would say, arguments vis-a-vis the court, this sort of all-powerful court that defines its rules and so on. Now, I want to take it down to the facts. The court conducts judicial review over legislation. This is common practice among democracies. This happens in many democracies. Now, up to 2022, the court canceled since 95, when that practice began. The court canceled about 20 pieces of legislation. About 4 of them, I have the exact list if you're interested, but I'm giving you the ballpark. About 4 of them had to do with the whole question of exemption.
There's a list right here for anybody that wants.
Okay.
There's a great list.
Everybody saw?
Yeah,
And-
thank you.
And in the IDI
Sorry.
and in the IDI website. But so the court canceled 20 pieces of legislation. About 4 of them had to do with the exemption bill, where the government and the Knesset really did not want to decide on the issue and kept throwing the issue back at the court. Now I want to ask you, 20 pieces of legislation on an average Knesset, and I've served in 2 Knessets. The Knesset legislates 3, 4, 450 different pieces of legislation. So between, say, 95 and 22, there were a few Knesset, maybe 2,000 pieces of legislation, and 20 were annulled. 1%. How does a check and balance look like if it's never used? The whole idea that in extreme cases, and then by the way, even when the court canceled the arrangement that allowed the government to provide a blanket exemption to the ultra-Orthodox as a result of the fact that it impedes equality. What did the court say? The court basically only told the Knesset, you cannot extend this bill, because it was about to expire, in its current format. So the whole idea of constitutional checks and balances is a dialogue between those different branches in our democracy. What's so terrible about the fact that this dialogue occurs, and in 1% of the cases, it returns a piece of legislation? This is how check. Now, the second and last point, quickly, yes. I am optimistic about the ability. I've been in debates, I've been in dialogues, I know Israeli public opinion. It's not about the people, it's about the leadership. If there's a leadership that wants, rather than firing up the emotions of its own base and turning Israelis against one another, if there's a leadership that wants to bring Israelis together, and I think this is the kind of leadership that we need, then agreeing on some broad principles, perhaps not a fully fledged constitution, but on the principles of a core constitution that will create some kind of an internal ceasefire. It's not only possible, it's necessary. And I think, obviously all Israelis need to take part in this discussion, but the right wing, the national religious group, the liberal, more traditional and secular group, those 2 main groups that lead Israeli society, take the security burden on their shoulders. Those 2 groups can sit together and agree, obviously reach out to the others as well, but if those 2 groups cannot agree, our future will be dim.
Listen, Toda, Yohanan, I hate to rush you guys, but there's so many people that want to...
I'll be quick. We want questions, and I'll do a very quick response, and then maybe we'll correct a few.
But let me ask you the same question, just before you make your...
What do I agree? I know what I agree.
Could you agree?
I can agree absolutely with Yohanan on many issues. One of them, most importantly, is that I am optimistic, and I'm not I don't know if you realize, but I'm not too optimistic about many elements of this issue. I am optimistic about the ability of the people, ordinary people, to get along, to figure this out. And a major part of the problem is not only the politicians, the leadership, but also the legal leadership. the judges themselves, the Supreme Court itself, the legal establishment, the law professors, who are constantly pushing the most radical, entrenched, barn-burning version of this issue. And hang on, very quickly, I just want to say, if you read my book, and please, this is why educating yourself is so important. When you read my book, you'll know why it's such a poor argument to say that the court has only struck down 20 laws. If you have a murderer who comes along and says, hey, I only killed 20 people, I met thousands of people, but I only killed 20, your first question is, well, that's not a very good excuse. I mean, you weren't supposed to kill anybody, and you're still going to jail. But number two is, which people also kind of matters, right? Was it self-defense? Was it something else? So you'll find out in my book that, A, it's not a very good argument because the court never had authority to strike down not even a single law. And one law is too much when you don't have the authority to do that. And no, there's no other country in the world where the court strikes down laws without a constitution. And B, which laws matters a lot. If they're the most important, consequential, controversial, divisive issues plaguing Israeli society with no basis in law, then yes, it matters a lot exactly which laws were struck down.
So,
Toda rabba.
Question.
Ilana, go ahead.
We'll collect a few.
Yeah. Sorry? No, nobody's going to remember.
First of all, I really thought that this debate would be about the laws that we want to change.
Everybody here hearing Ilana? You want to come here?
It needs to be a quick sentence with a question mark at the end.
No, my question is to Yohanan, because you went on like ranting about the Israeli government and all the, that wants the power. So what is your suggestion? That the Supreme Court will take all the power and do the decisions?
That's already the situation.
Because this is what came out from your words. Instead of, I think what we need to be done is to strengthen the Knesset, the parliament, and not say, okay, the government wants to take the power, so okay, the Supreme Court now will decide everything for us. So
the government has a lot of power, and the most power, and should continue to have a lot of power. I gave an example whereby the court annulled over more than 20 years less than 1% of legislation. So that's, the government should have power, but this power, like in every democracy, should be constrained. And I absolutely agree with you that the Knesset as an institution, which today basically doesn't exist, should be strengthened. And there's a whole array of specifics on how to do it.
Ken, b'vaksa.
Thank you. I'm Greg Dolan. I'm a law professor at the University of Baltimore. Despite being a law professor, I'll be quick.
And he was Justice of the Supreme Court in the island nation of Palau.
I was. I'm fully in support of the idea of checks and balances. The question, though, I have is, what are the current checks and balances beyond internal ones? Even taking the view that only 20 times the court struck down laws. But beyond internal checks and balances, what are the current checks and balances on the Supreme Court of Israel? And what should they be?
Yonatan, maybe you're going to answer that.
I'd like to hear Yohanan's answers as well. Of course, there are certain very, very slim limits on the Supreme Court's power, but actually that's a critical point, because let's think what's not a limit on the court's power. The law is absolutely not on the limit on the court's power. The court has explicitly abandoned the idea of adhering to the words of the law. Politics are not limit on the court's power, because the court has limited and restrained the court's any ability of the politicians to inhibit the court's power, including by constitutional amendment, according to the court's own theory that Israel has a constitution and that the Knesset makes that constitution. Now the Knesset is since 2024, the Knesset is no longer permitted to even create constitutional amendments. So the answer today, and by the way, this isn't just me, I'm just going to say, Judge Richard Plesner, who is the most cited legal scholar of the 20th century, one of the greatest jurists of all time, wrote a very famous essay on the Israeli legal system. It's called Enlightened Despots. I think you understand the tone of his essay when he wrote it, Enlightened Despots in the New Republic, look it up. He wrote that according to Aaron Barak's vision of checks and balances, it is only the court that does checking and balancing to the other branches of government, and there's no reciprocal checking and balancing going the other way.
Okay, now I'm in the audience and I have a question. Yeah. So could it be just a political issue? You mentioned the night that law, Chok Kvod Adam V'Cheruto, passed in a very tiny majority. It's a very known story. Dan Meridor has, he knows how to tell the story.
This book is better. It describes it better. Yeah.
Anyways, The way I witnessed it was indeed not good in this engagement in the summer of 2005, which tore the country to pieces. That's the way. That's the day that everything changed. You know, everybody think it's the Oslo Accords, A and B. No, it's the disengagement. I was there. We've been there. We all been there. Could that be the? Yohanan, I'm going to ask you. Since you've been involved, you've been in the military service for years, you've been in the politics, and you're the head of the Institute of Democracy. Could the whole issue be just plain politics and that's it?
Well, politics is the managing the affairs of state. Obviously, how we manage our affairs, how we make decisions without using violence. Yeah, this is the subject of our debate. But I think perhaps an important point, even when we want to make changes on the most sensitive, delicate arrangements that define our common life and define how we distribute power and how we make decisions, I think as conservatives, by the way, I started my career working for Arik Sharon, and
that's the point. This is why I'm asking you the question. Maybe
so
Arik Sharon, during this engagement, abused his power, and that's where everything began.
So I think, yeah, well, even as, I can, this engagement happened 21 years ago, we can talk about it, but even as conservatives, I think we have to make constitutional changes. The process should be approached with conservatism. You don't want to do it with a woke radicalism of changing everything at once, and then if you discover that you broke the whole system, it's too late. You want to make adjustments step by step, and in this sense, if you want to change the authorities of the court and change the authorities and change the Knesset, you should do it step by step.
Let's go.
Two more questions.
I don't know how much time we still have.
We can have a fist fight.
We're going to let quick question and quick answers. Present yourself.
Marianne Cruz from Aventura, Florida. What would the new constitution say about the creation of new parties? If you got a feeling of the vibrant Miami, okay? In the past week only, we had 10 Israelis saying, I'm opening a new party. In your opinion, and number two, when will be the best time to create this constitution? A wise Israeli friend said, you have to be careful who the writers of the constitution is.
Do you want to collect another question that we'll try and answer both, Yigal?
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, you.
I think I'm going to stick around over here if anybody wants to ask more questions. I'll be in the back.
Lenny Roth from Sunny Isles. I guess it's a question for both of you. I mean, we're looking at a separation of powers, checks and balances. They're really only two branches. You got the judiciary, and it's not a bicameral. It's not even a difference between the executive and the legislature. So I guess the question for each of you is, I guess Yonatan, starting with you, at what point should there be some sort of overriding rule of law that enables government decisions to be struck down by a court, even though they're not elected and the government is? And Yohanan, I guess, even you admitted that there's been a lot of creeping overreach and judicial hegemony that makes a lot of people in Israel feel like you have unelected judges override elected politicians.
I'll answer both these questions together because I think they both relate to some extent to the creation of Israeli constitution, or how and when can we actually finally try and cement some binding rules that everybody agrees to, which can control some of the things that happen. I think that was part of also the question of the lady behind. At the end of my book, I propose a constitutional assembly like we had in 1949, meaning this is at least one way to do it, which is extraordinary that nobody's been suggesting this over the past 70 years, even though this was really the original sin of Israeli constitutionalism, that we never had an original, a new constitutional assembly. Not a new constitution, not you and me getting together and writing a constitution, but an actual assembly where people get together, you vote for delegates in the assembly, they put together a draft of constitution, send it out to everybody, etc. I do want to say very quickly about consensus and graduality and doing things a proper, methodical, slow way, etc. Very interesting that this was not an objection when the court did that. There was no consensus when the court completely overhauled the Israeli system of government. There was no debate. There was no public participation or politics. There was no participation of the electorate. The court did everything unilaterally with no consensus. And I see it's interesting that has become an issue only when the government actually wants to change that. But the last answer, I think, is this. First of all, I'll say to the gentleman in front, what's his name? Mr. Roth, I think. I will just say there are many democratic countries in which courts cannot strike down laws. Not just New Zealand or England, which don't have constitutions. The Netherlands, Section 120 of the Netherlands Constitution, no court can strike down an act of parliament. But more importantly, we can have a long conversation about what's a good idea or not. But the problem is that the court has already decided that for us. The court went ahead and said, this will be your system of government. Like it or not, you can't change it, you have to keep it, and that's what I think needs to change.
Okay, Ron Mazol, present yourself. Where are you from? What are you doing? Are you connected?
Yeah, from here, but as Israeli. Quick question. For the Ta'ala and Haredi participation in the military, where do you see this moving in the next few years? You know, Ta'ala expired, we just finished October 7th. Military, you know, and religious participation in the military, especially among the ultra-Orthodox, has been a very hot button. Where do you see this moving for democracy and for over the next 5-10 years?
Well, you know, this is very much the debate that is now defining Israeli politics. The government is trying to promote in the Knesset a new version of an exemption bill. It finds it difficult to build a majority in the coalition because obviously it's very, very unpopular within the Israeli people. I believe, though, that if it will be a decision of the government and especially the Prime Minister that he wants to pass this legislation, he will be able to pass it. There will be a blanket exemption. And it's really a consideration of whether this is what he wants to do just before he goes to an election. The fact that it's unpopular among the Israeli public doesn't necessarily mean that it will exact a political price, because, you know, people can be against something, but then their political behavior is affected by many other factors. If the current legislation that is in the Knesset, it will, in a sense, if to connect it to our current discussion, deepen our constitutional tensions, because the current version is de facto a blanket exemption, which will go back to the court, and the court again will be probably forced to cancel it. And by the way, I spoke before about the merits of gradual change. The court today is a conservative court. There's a conservative majority. It's a conservative court.
It's not true.
And the next Supreme Chief Justice is a national religious settler from Gush Etzion, Noam Solberg. So there's something about letting changes evolve over time and not forcing change in a way that...
Haverim, I couldn't figure this is going to be so exciting. We are running out of time. There's another
Yigal, I want to do a 10-second answer to that question.
We got to go.
10-second answer to that first question? Okay, just the answer. The court has been involved with the Haredi ultra-Orthodox draft exemption. I, of course, served in the Israeli military, a combat role. I actually started outside at Matkal, and I've served also in Miluim since then. The Israeli Supreme Court has been involved with the Haredi ultra-Orthodox exemption since 1988. Ruling after ruling after ruling. Has it fixed anything? Are we any closer to Haredi Giyus because of the court? I suggest that if the court hadn't been involved so aggressively and so lawlessly, today the Haredim would already be in the army.
Haverim, it's been באמת pleasure, real pleasure, meeting you all here, having this debate here. And I mean, תמיד אומרים, הייתם קהל נהדר, you've really been wonderful. Thank you, appreciate it very much. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
I should say I have a few books back there which are signed, which I'm selling after Shabbat. I can dedicate them.